uncertainty indicates the problem of what impact new and unfavorable existential conditions have on our state of mind. Ironically, in uncertain times, one thing at least seems certain, that we live in uncertain times. The problem with this certainty, however, is that it blocks the uncertainty that helps us politically qualify the assumption that we live in uncertain times. Is this we homogeneous across the globe? Are times uncertain for all and equally so? Are only our times uncertain? Have other times been more certain? For who, about what, and in what sense? For example, in modernity, the colonial powers enjoyed more certainties than the subaltern people who suffered divide and rule policies and still struggle with the unmanageable legacies. Unclear is also whether our age is indeed as objectively or thoroughly uncertain as the rhetoric entails. Perhaps mass psychology reactions hegemonize the hollow uncertain times narrative and turn it into a certainty. If that is the case, then uncertainty characterizes more the spirit of the times than the times themselves. Nevertheless, there is a broad academic consensus that we live in uncertain times. This consensus is handled varyingly. Most researchers, educational researchers among them, use the uncertain times metaphor assertively, without considering it being a global cliché. The uncertainty metaphor is their springboard for proceeding with their own research agendas without specifying to whose less uncertain future the researchers' recommendations contribute. Other researchers say more about uncertainty and spell out how this informs their recommendations and suggested solutions. But they diverge on their assumptions about uncertainty as such. Some researchers assume that uncertainty is bad, totally disempowering, and eradicable, at least to an extent. For them, uncertainty is there to be controlled, managed, and minimized. Others embrace uncertainty as an existential given, or even as something good, but dispute whether we should adapt to or transform the world. Some support the development of a capacity to work in uncertainty. Many valorize renewal as the appropriate response. Different positions on uncertainty have different political implications. Let me indicatively unpack some responses. I begin with responses that consider uncertainty a bad thing. There is a response that incriminates uncertainty wholesale and sustains defensive reactions that romanticize a past of certitudes. I call this response retrotopian. Zygmunt Bauman termed retrotopias the nostalgic representations of the past as idyllic and the plea to return to good old times in fear of too uncertain and ominous a future. Such reactions favor regressive remedies for current ills and feed off the social psychological given that under conditions of uncertainty, people are biased against creativity and prefer mundane functionality. It has been noted that one bad consequence of uncertainty is its potential to trigger, enable, or prolong violent conflict or mobilize religious zeal. Retrotopian reactions to uncertainty are prone to such consequences. As two American educationists put it concerning their country, Americans are told that because they have lost their national certainty, if they accept Christian education and conservative economic policies, this will somehow magically restore prosperity and bedrock values. However, we should not be misled to thinking that conservative are only past-oriented reactions. The future-oriented reactions to uncertainty that I term responses of control are also conservative. Let us recall that Hobbes' understanding of the temporal situation of human beings privileged the future to a degree unprecedented in the history of ideas. From a Hobbesian perspective, the only way out of the hazards of an intolerably uncertain future is for us to give our unconditional allegiance to the sovereign power, whether it be monarchic, oligarchic, or democratic, whether we consider its judgments to be just or unjust. Hopes is a precursor of many current ideologies that aim to subdue uncertainty by an ethical politics of control. A non-nuanced incrimination of uncertainty sustains a politics of compulsion to offer performances of control, subtle forms of oppression, and knee-jerk authoritarian reactions that instill fear. The underlying assumption is often that there is an expedient route to certainty. To follow it, all we need is just to gain new knowledge, skills, and techniques. Even some politics of uncertainty that purport to be forward-looking may be deeply conservative when framed as expert-defined solutions with uncertainties blanked out. Asserted with great confidence, such burgeoning notions act to suppress appreciation of many forms of uncertainty. Conceived in narrow technical terms, informed by relatively homogeneous specialist views, these core organizing ideas for high-level global policy making typically emphasize control. They valorize heroic leadership, visionary expertise, deterministic systems, orderly values, compliant citizens, and expediently predictable futures. Consequently, some highly uncertain issues that should remain open for political debate are imagined in circumscribed, biased, and one-directional ways. Techno-managerial elites often advance such politics and deploy uncertainty and kindred concepts for instrumental advantage. What the advantage may be diversifies handlings of uncertainty. While some use uncertainty as an excuse to authorize controversial actions, there is also the opposite, though equally problematic, handling. Politicians and the public often appeal to uncertainty as an argument to delay mitigative action, and also to ignore that uncertainty may be a source of actionable knowledge. Inaction is condoned by assuming that related epistemic uncertainties indicate ignorance or powerlessness. For example, uncertainty becomes an excuse for avoiding measures for climate protection. A counter-argument to such claims is that uncertainty should impel more action, precisely because greater uncertainty increases climate destruction risks. Those who spot the use of uncertainty as an excuse for inactivity stress that the adverse impacts of uncertainty should empower decision makers to take mitigative action. Yet, even this reaction has its own risks. It may legitimize all sorts of unprecedented measures on the pretext of securing more certainty to a global public prepared to accept them by the dispersed rhetoric of uncertain times. However, undesirable politics may not come only from sweeping incriminations of uncertainty that aim to control it. Even positions which accept, perhaps value, uncertainty may use it questionably. I distinguish two kinds of such affirmations of uncertainty. One is the adaptive. The other is the emancipatory or transformative response. A few words about the adaptive response. While abandoning the pretense of control can open up space for progressive alternatives, this too can itself enable regressive forces to exploit spaces of uncertainty without actual transformation of economy, society, and politics. This is evident in neoliberal or functionalist responses to the uncertainty rhetoric that advance the adaptation to a changing world. The ability to adapt quickly and effortlessly to change becomes the new cardinal virtue. This response raises too limited a challenge, since uncertainty is there to be uniformly accepted. Uncertainty, ironically, turns into an epistemic certainty that we should learn to live with. Educationally, such responses treat schooling as an adaptive and socializing institution that will make the new generations feel the new order as a homely place. I quote, "If one is to be at home in this new world, The means of socialization, especially education, must adapt, or better still, lead the way. This will require profound change in pedagogy, epistemology, content, delivery models, and organization, unquote. These responses limit educational tasks to, I quote, the preparation of learners to respond effectively, adaptively, and in collaboration or competition with others to uncertainty, surprise, and novelty, end of quote. Such now popular discourses on educational reform inflate the educational need for more flexible, creative, and analytic learners through forward-looking diversification of the curriculum and technology use. The suggested education for uncertain times is to serve, rather than reshape, the new realities. Related writings enumerate the adaptive changes that will be required in higher education and recommend future strategies for education for a global society. They identify, I quote, gaps in today's educational landscape and how it is failing the future, unquote. Is this a known or a certain future, by the way? Importantly, however, theory, educational or other, has not responded only adaptively to current realities and their uncertainty rhetoric. The emancipatory or transformative response treats radical change as key to dealing with uncertain times without disparaging uncertainty. Some scholars argue that a small dose of unanswered questions in the social system increases liberalism, toleration, fairness, and more efficient flows of information. An emancipatory politics of uncertainty recognizes that a world where risks must always be controlled falls far short of meeting the transformative challenges in cases of incertitude and existential risks that cannot be controlled. The effort is to hit the mean. I quote, "To take a politics of uncertainty seriously, we must recognize the need to manage some uncertainties and simultaneously the fact that control of all this is not possible and attempts to exert such control create grave political hazard," unquote. Since this emancipatory response is the most attractive and progressive one, it will be the focus of the rest of this lecture. But before I proceed, I will prepare my critical ground first with some remarks on uncertainty and education, and then with one educational response that neither incriminates nor exalts uncertainty. The politics and rhetoric of uncertainty generally instrumentalizes education. Education in and for uncertain times becomes a topology of uncertainty and a means either for uncritically embracing uncertainty or for keeping away its disempowering effects. Scholars of education use troubling times and complex and rapidly changing environments rhetoric to ask from teachers to meet the challenge of more uncertainties in their field than before. Just as in policy discourses, leadership ideologies extol leaders as visionaries who manage uncertainty or navigate safely in choppy and uncharted waters of uncertain times, likewise, educational discourses place, often self-indulgently, the educationalist in the morally privileged and elitist position of the regulator of uncertainty and leader in uncertain times. Teachers and teacher educators, like the whole education system, are summoned to respond to the growing complexity of the challenges of today's world. We encounter again the expedient route to knowledge. The issue is reduced to what teachers should know, what form of teacher education is best suited in times of uncertainty and instability, and how teacher educators contribute to the education of committed and knowledgeable teachers to be. This rhetoric is echoed even in statements that praise educationalists and educational researchers for always being at the forefront of efforts to respond to societal changes. Despite the admission that the age of uncertainty has been exceptionally challenging for education systems and teachers across the world, The expectation is that educators and the educated can and will play a decisive role in optimizing the world's response to an unknown future. Easier said than done, perhaps. There are important critiques of educational realities that give the lie to such facile futurism. Concerning higher education, the times are such that most graduates have limited chances of acquiring well-paid employment after getting a university degree, and thus too limited access to power positions that allow for intervention. Moreover, the education system itself becomes uncertain, a commodity and a pseudo-education that reflects the momentary needs of the market for specialists. As for universities, they have so surrendered to competitiveness for a place in the sun of fetishized international rankings that little they care for lofty ideals. Such realities are often ignored by those who overemphasize the role of education in reducing uncertainty or in utilizing its advantages. Yet, there are also mediatory responses that neither dismiss nor extol uncertainty. These mediatory responses illuminate the pros and cons of embedding uncertainty in the educational practice and the potential advantages of making uncertainty part of professional learning and teaching. Related works seek to hit a mean again. Experiencing uncertainty may render students inactive and unprepared for contemporary professional life. Yet, overconfidence concerning one's certitudes is misleading and pernicious. Such responses stress that uncertainty is not an end in itself, continuously depriving students of their certainties and teaching them to take a critical and suspicious stance towards any professional truth may be paralyzing. Yet, some acceptance of uncertainty is necessary if students are not to think of professional life as static, without any room for renewal, adaptation, or deviant perspectives. Such responses helpfully challenge sweeping assumptions about uncertainty, although, regrettably, without addressing the politics of the uncertainty rhetoric and related power dynamics. They miss that any educationally fruitful effort stumbles on educational inequalities that reflect socio-political inequalities. The breeding of greater uncertainty that continues within schools turns even more palpable when one enters unprivileged schools and harks to teachers in poor communities who express uncertainty and powerlessness in their ability to engage their students. Emancipatory and transformative responses to uncertainty are more promising than adaptive responses and more sensitive to power than the mediatory ones. In my view, however, even the emancipatory responses are also too absorbed by a problem-solving rather than question-raising sensibility. Even when the uncertainty rhetoric is not co-opted by retrotopian, adaptive, or controlling conservative discourses, its problem-solving logic remains unexamined and blocks more question-raising standpoints, often at cross purposes with critical intentions and declarations. Many certainties of contemporary discourses are not interrogated. Such is, for example, the promise to rethink that pervades educational theory and defines appropriate tasks in uncertain times. For in current academia and in the public sphere, the responsiveness rhetoric sustains the pattern that involves a detected crisis, the current critical times that produce or increase uncertainty, and a prescribed cure typically posited as a worthwhile and promised by a worthwhile act premised by the prefix re. For example, rethinking, revisiting, reimagining, reformulating, and so on. Here is a related quote from an otherwise important investigation of the uncertainty politics. By opening up spaces to reimagine futures, to dream and to construct alternatives, uncertainties can be confronted in positive ways, not as threats or sources of fear, but as sources of hope and possibility. unquote. I ask, are all uncertainties sources of hope? Is this not a callous assumption when associated with the uncertainties experienced by people whose rights to their land are denied? Those whose pleas for their human rights have for years fallen on the deaf ears of the global community. Those who experience the specific uncertainty of being forced to flee and other related injustices may consider our thought too immersed in our comfort zones and our imagination not vivid enough. Our dreams may appear part of the problem rather than its solution. Any re may be little other than repetition, reverberation, and reinforcement of our certainties. Our vague reimagining of the future is not enough to meet these people's claims when we are silent about the global policies that have produced such situations, and when our discourses fail to engage with key categories such as cosmopolitan justice. Just as there are ghettos and underprivileged neighborhoods within states, likewise within the globe there are neighborhoods of unresolved tensions and effects of geopolitics where the real and experienced uncertainty differs from that of other localities. There are contexts where people have been living in highly vulnerable, uncertain settings. For example, places of invaded and occupied land or of ongoing crimes against humanity, such as settler politics and demographic alterations. Cyprus and Palestine are cases in point. Self-proclaimed progressive authors notice only within their own spaces that uncertainties generate place-based political ecologies and economies of vulnerability, raising questions of causal explanation and ethical responsibility. They do not think this insight through to its deeper and broader political implications that complicate uniformly sanguine valorizations of uncertainty as a source of hope and rethinking. The degree of uncertainty, who experience it, about what and how, should add important nuances to our temporal self-understandings. The uncertainty about life and death of Palestinians facing the double standards of the world community for over a century, or the uncertainty of the Armenians fleeing from Nagorno-Karabakh, having for decades faced the international community's blind, self-contradictory and immoral denial to grant them the right to self-determination that they merit, cannot be the same existentially or ethico-politically with the uncertainty that global elites feel, say, when prices of luxury cars go up. The generality about the age of uncertainty, with its inclusive facade, homogenizes reality and enforces the false impression that the times are uniformly critical and uncertain. To anticipate an objection, let me clarify that I am not romanticizing colonized peoples, nor am I saying that they have no historical liabilities. However, any scrutiny of the genealogies of their conflicts proves immense complicities of historically powerful countries and cosmopolitan justice deficits, a now much overlooked theme, perhaps conveniently so, even by those who academically capitalize on decoloniality. Standard and unreflective uses of the uncertainty metaphor push this past into the background, ignoring the chain of events, causalities, and ethico-political failures that led to such diverse adversities. Thus, the generic suggestion to rethink and reimagine may strike some people as blithe, gruesome even, especially when coming from parts of the world that have had more power to do things otherwise, or worse, that have actively exacerbated the related global politics. Consider also the statement that a new, desirable politics of uncertainty may constitute, I quote, a momentum for a fundamental rethinking of existing relationships between state protection, technical expertise, and deliberative citizenship under uncertainty, unquote. The statement presupposes only social and democratic justice within the state. It says nothing about how one's state, one's country, treats other peoples and states. Consider also the following, I quote, "In today's complex, turbulent, interconnected, globalized world, uncertainty must be embraced as perhaps more central than ever. Opening up to uncertainty offers opportunity, diversity, and a politics of hope," unquote. Which uncertainty? Just any. How would such statements sound to people whose uncertainty is about being alive the next day due to the criminal global politics of the very Western states from which these authors depart and for which they make these recommendations? In similar educational rhetorics, I quote, "Solving crisis requires rethinking democratic education," unquote. Educational normativity becomes crisis-dependent and singularly problem-solving. And we notice again the exaltation of rethinking. This rethinking reproduces the responsiveness to the world from a democratic state scope that ignores cosmopolitan justice. But what's in the prefix "re" of the rethinking cliché that is valorized across disciplinary divisions? It is assumed that the "re" ensures that the act indicated by the verb will be performed again, though in a different way. It creates the expectation of a new effort, of moving backwards, reviewing the past, in order to move forward, to leap to another discursive space and mend one's ways. However, nothing within the "re" precludes repetition, falling back into how things were before, and eventually rendering movement circular, a loop back to the habitual. Instead of producing radical change, the "re" usually affirms Alphonse Karr's dictum that, I quote, "the more things change, the more they stay the same," unquote. Contra the current rhetorical valorization of the "re", I suggest that it should not be treated as an end in itself. Much research homogenizes today's world, using the uncertain age rhetoric as a general frame without mentioning why the times we live in are more uncertain than the times before, and if they are, how and why this has transpired. The focus on our times reproduces the modern experience of temporal rupture and those interpretations of the present escalation of the human drama that obliterate the ethical and epistemic weight of the past. Contra modern unqualified futurism, we must qualify the importance of the future by the continuing importance of the past, because sufferings have a history that gives them meaning. We must heed to the multiplicity of historical memories tied to the everyday lives of the disenfranchised. To this end, we need great care, not only for the horizon that is advancing, but also for the horizon that is receding. Uniformly treating uncertainty as the new existential given obscures that past generations have also experienced uncertainty, even if of different kinds and concerning different aspects of existence. Moreover, precisely because past realities produce diversified existential positioning for various collectivities, the past haunts the present and is still operative. It nuances uncertainty as an existential given for some more than for others. It is stated that uncertainty is more likely to yield calamitous outcomes than benign consequences. This is true especially when uncertainty is not just an epistemic matter, but an effectively significant political fact of material origins and effects. Some uncertainties are of this kind and have indeed psychologically adverse consequences, though not always and not for all people. Depending on one's situation, uncertainties may be embraced as an opportunity or encountered as a source of dread, fear, and anxiety. Likewise, the claim that uncertainty is unavoidable should be qualified. Who cannot avoid uncertainty? What uncertainty? Affective and experiential variegations of uncertainty complicate the generality of the uncertain times metaphor. Hence, I suggest that uncertainty should be examined as to power differentials that make its likelihood or consequences unevenly felt across the world. And I'm concluding with 2 more small paragraphs. Turning self-reflectively toward our use of popular and standardized temporal metaphors may enhance our vigilance about their ambiguous politics. Otherwise, what starts off as an important insight may be consumed by the very metaphor it has been addressing. Therefore, without dismissing the discursive affordances of the age of uncertainty metaphor, I have argued that awareness of the related politics may help us give historical memory its due, notice deep and complex connections of education with the causalities of crisis, and avoid some risks in the uncritical overuse of crisis and uncertainty epochal metaphors. Jeff Hinchliffe, a philosopher of education, once said that there is a politically valuable desire for knowledge that is driven by uncertainty and is content to remain uncertain. The kind of comportment we need to have towards the world needs to be characterized by a degree of uncertainty, unquote. What degree, however? Only some uncertainty should be accepted as an existential condition and an epistemic attitude. And only some uncertainty, ethico-politically, undermines facile prescriptions and modish cures. Spotting which one is a daunting and uncertain task. Thank you very much for your attention.